this hearing. Today in our country, over 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, and millions are working for starvation wages. Unbelievably, despite an explosion in technology and huge increases in worker productivity, the average American worker is making $50 a week less than he or she made 50 years ago after adjusting for inflation. Unless we change the nature of the way our economy works, it is all too likely that our younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents. What this means in reality is that workers throughout our country are struggling to pay for housing, struggling to pay for health care and prescription drugs, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to pay off their student debts, and to deal with other basic necessities of life. And while that is the reality for the working class of this country, here is another reality, and that is that the people on top have never, ever had it so good. Today in America, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had, with the top 1% now owning more wealth than the bottom 90%, with CEOs now making 400 times what their workers are making, and with 3 people at the top owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. That is the economic reality that exists today. People on top doing extraordinarily well, millions of working families struggling. And as a result of that economic reality, what we are now seeing is a major increase in trade union organizing. Throughout our country, in blue-collar jobs and in white-collar jobs, workers are standing up and they are fighting back to form unions in order to improve their wages, their benefits, and their working conditions. These workers know, as I do, that union workers earn 20% more on average than non-union workers. These workers also know, as I do, that union workers have better health care benefits, better paid family and medical leave policies, are much more likely to have a pension, and are less likely to be victims of health and safety violations compared to non-union workers. At a time when 71% of the American people now approve of unions, the highest level since 1965, there has been a major revitalization of the trade union movement in this country. Between 2021 and 2022, the number of union elections taking place in America has gone up by 53%. And since 2020, workers have voted to form a union in over 70% of union elections. Rather extraordinary. And now that is the good news for those of us who understand that strong unions are a vital part of rebuilding the declining middle class in this country. That's the good news. The bad news is that in order to combat this increase in union organizing, corporations have engaged in an unprecedented level of illegal union busting activities, which takes us to the focus of today's hearing. Over the past 18 months, Starbucks has waged the most aggressive and illegal union busting campaign in the modern history of our country. That union busting campaign has been led by Howard Schultz, the multi-billionaire founder and director of Starbucks, who is with us this morning only under the threat of subpoena. Let us be clear about the nature of Starbucks' vicious anti-union efforts. The National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, has filed over 80 complaints against Starbucks for violating federal labor law. There have been over 500 unfair labor practice charges lodged against the company, and judges have found that Starbucks broke the law 130 times across 6 states since workers began organizing in the fall of 2021. These violations include the illegal firing of more than a dozen Starbucks workers for the crime of exercising their right to form a union and to collectively bargain for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. Since the first Starbucks union was certified more than 450 days ago in Buffalo, workers at more than 360 stores across 40 states have held union elections. 83% of these elections have resulted in a union victory, and today nearly 300 Starbucks coffee shops employing more than 7,000 workers have a union, despite Starbucks' aggressive anti-union efforts. But with nearly 300 shops voting to form a union, Starbucks has refused to sign a single first contract with the union. Not a single one. Think about that. Think about a multi-billion-dollar company with unlimited resources, with all kinds of lawyers, advisors, consultants, and yet they have not yet signed one contract with any of their nearly 300 unionized shops. Just a few weeks ago, on March 1st, an administrative law judge found Starbucks guilty of, quote, egregious and widespread misconduct, end quote, which showed, quote, a general disregard for the employees' fundamental rights, end quote. In a 220-page ruling, this judge found that Starbucks illegally retaliated against employees for unionizing, promised improved pay and benefits if workers rejected the union, conducted illegal surveillance of pro-union workers, refused to hire prospective employees who supported the union, relocated union organizers to new stores, and overstaffed stores ahead of union votes, all clear violations of federal labor law. The judge also found that Starbucks, quote, widespread coercive behavior over 6 months had permeated every store in the Buffalo market, end quote. The judge ordered Starbucks to reinstate 7 workers who were wrongfully terminated, reopen a pro-union store in Buffalo that was illegally shut down, and pay, quote, reasonable consequential damages, end quote, to more than 24 Starbucks workers whose rights were violated by the company. And let us be clear, Starbucks' egregious union-busting campaign is not limited to Buffalo. It is happening all over America. Federal courts in Tennessee and Michigan have issued emergency injunctions requiring Starbucks to reinstate workers who were illegally fired and to prohibit the coffee chain from firing workers for supporting unionization efforts in the future. In Scottsdale and Phoenix, Arizona, the NLRB has charged Starbucks with committing 8 violations of labor law when it disciplined, fired, and forced out workers because they cooperated with federal investigations. On November 30th of last year, the NLRB found that Starbucks unlawfully refused to recognize and bargain with the union at its Reserve Roastery store in Seattle.
As I said, it's been liquidated. The paths to getting more money from banks is no longer possible. So all they can do is go to black people and say, look, you've got land, you've got your labor power, let's make a deal. And the deal that gets made is often confused with what comes later. The deal that gets made is what we call sheer wages.